Hello and welcome to another episode of the Maxi-Geek Show. Today is Friday, January 13th, and this is episode number 44. This week has been a little quieter than last week, what with CES 2023 happening back then, so there isn't a whole lot of news this week that we need to talk about. However, the stories that do exist are big stories, so we'll definitely talk about them. Once we get through the news, we'll take a look at some of the 2023 preview stories that we have put up this week, and we shall end with what games are out this coming week. First up though, we are going to dive into a gameplay reveal for Tales of Symphonia. So Tales of Symphonia Remastered is coming out very soon from Bandai Namco. It is coming out for Switch and PlayStation, both digitally and in stores, but Xbox players will only be able to play the game via digital methods. They won't be doing a retail release for that one. The gameplay trailer that they showed off, it doesn't show off anything especially new. We have seen some of this stuff before, but it does dive into showing off more of the combat and the world, which is something we haven't seen since they first announced this game. Obviously, this is a remastering of the original GameCube game. However, they're using the PlayStation 2 version, which was an inferior version of the game back then. The GameCube version ran at 60 frames a second, the PlayStation 2 version ran at 30 frames a second. So, because this is a remastering of the PS2 version, this is locked to 30 frames a second. But yeah, we get to see a lot more of the combat of, you will see here about how the statuses and the power-ups work, the team attacks and all that sort of stuff. So it's very, very cool that they've done that. As I said, the game is coming out very, very soon, February 17th, so we're literally about a month away from release on that one, which is not that far away. And also, hello Diggs, thanks for stopping by. It's one that I'm sort of looking for. I've got fond memories of the original release, but at the same time, I had the GameCube version, so even if this looks prettier, I don't know if this is going to be one that I'm going to be like chomping at the bit to get my hands on. But that may be. We'll see how that shakes out. Moving on, this week we also got confirmation on what the next few titles were going to be for the PlayStation Plus series for the Essentials and the Deluxe tiers. So obviously here in Australia, PlayStation Plus has the 3 tiers like they do in other parts of the world, but here we have the extra and the deluxe tiers. We don't have the premium tier that they have in other parts of the world. The premium tier actually includes streamable PlayStation 3 games. Sony Australia have not put any of the infrastructure to do that here, so we don't have that, so they call our highest tier deluxe. If you're on the Essential plan, you get the 2 free games that have gone live already. The 3 free games, which are Fallout 76, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, and Axiom Verge 2. If you're on the Extra plan, you get those 3 titles and access to Back 4 Blood, Dragon Ball FighterZ, Devil May Cry 5, Life is Strange Before the Storm, Life is Strange, Sayonara Wild Hearts, Jet the Far Shore, Just Cause 4, Ono, and Erica. So a few of those are PS5 versions are available, most of them are PS4 versions. If you're on the deluxe tier, so you pay the $155 a year for the deluxe tier, then you get access to all the previous games I've mentioned, as well as Siphon Filter 3 for PlayStation 1, Star Wars Demolition for PlayStation 1, and Hot Shots Golf 2 for PlayStation 1. It's an interesting collection for the deluxe. So in the extra level, Just Cause 4, it's a good addition. Sayonara Wild Hearts is a fantastic title. The 2 Life is Strange games have a certain charm to them. I didn't connect with the series, but that's me. Devil May Cry 5 is fantastic. It was also one of the first games to get sort of redone for the PlayStation 5 at launch. It was originally a PS4 title. And Dragon Ball FighterZ is always a good time. But the deluxe tier, Siphon Filter 3 is a great game. It's made by what is now Ben Studio, who did Days Gone for PlayStation 4. Hot Shots Golf 2 is more of just, the Hot Shots Golf series, or Everybody Golf series, depending on where you were in the world. Star Wars Demolition is the weird one, because it is not a good game. It is basically like Twisted Metal, but the Star Wars version of it. And we know that, Star Wars versions of, popular games are usually rushed and never work. So it looks bad. It doesn't have a lot of replay value to it. It's just not a fun thing. You will get some joy out of it for maybe 20-30 minutes, but then you'll move on. Speaking of moving on, we're going to move into the world of Xbox. Specifically, we're going to talk about their new update that's coming. So Xbox release console updates sort of every couple of months. It's a pretty consistent cycle. They don't tend to do, anything off sort of schedule for that. But this update that they're bringing is a pretty big one, because what it's going to do is offer players 2 new modes for both Xbox One and Xbox Series X and S. The big addition is active hours. So active hours, you can set your console to use what they're calling active hours, right? Which basically means that if you play any time between, say, 3 in the afternoon and midnight, that's when you can sit down and do some gaming on your Xbox. If you tell the console that that's your active hours, between midnight and 3 p.m, it'll go into a super shutdown state, right? So it'll use roughly half a watt of power compared to the 15 to 20 watts it's using, during regular use. So it is an absolutely minuscule amount of power. The reason why that is important, right? The reason why that is very, very cool is because if you do game at 3 in the morning, let's say you work afternoons into nights, or you're a night shift worker, you do game at odd hours, you can set the active hours so your console is, awake and ready for you when you are ready to game. If you do turn the console on outside of the active hours, it will take an extra moment or two to boot up. But other than that, when you're inside active hours, it will turn on and do so. Great, we've got that there. Now, the other one that they have, let me just get rid of the page, get rid of that ad in the middle. The other one they have is the shutdown mode. So currently, the 2 options that are in there are I can't think of the names of them. One's like instant boot, a quick boot, and one's like, not. If you do the not boot, the console's still on, it's still there, it's still, doing things. The shutdown mode is actually very, very, very different. It does reduce the power consumption, as one would expect. But it will, your console will still allow for, overnight updates and things like that, for if you have that stuff sort of turned on. But the big thing is that you cannot remotely wake the console. So if you're on your Xbox app and you're traveling and, you're on your way home and you want to make sure that, you've got the new, the Forza updates downloaded or something, you can't do that remotely with this mode selected. This mode is designed for someone who wants to sit down at home once they're available, turn their console on, and then start playing. Obviously that is going to draw in, a number of different people for a number of reasons. The active hours for me is a good one because, I don't need my console waking up at 3 in the morning in order to download an update or, whatever it needs, whatever it's trying to do. So if I can tell my console, hey, I don't play at that time of day, so you shouldn't be turned on, that'll be great. I just wish, the one thing I'm begging for them to do is to say, hey, between, 11 p.m. at night and 2 a.m., this is when you can download all these updates that come out, right? So instead of, in the middle of the day or in the middle of a gaming session, we can download them. But that's something I'm after personally. It is great to see that they are, thinking of these new ways to, obviously there are benefits to the gamer, but the benefit is obviously, in terms of not using as much energy. One of the things that they're doing, which is, they're still sort of working out the kinks in it, is with the active hours, shifting the hours around depending on, the amount of renewables in the system. So, if the sun's blaring down like it is at the moment here in Australia, your console would be on, available during the day, but at night, not so much. And all that is designed as a way to make sure that if there's plenty of power around from solar, wind, water, whatever it happens to be, that the consoles can be used to their fullest and not worry about, drawing unnecessary or drawing power away from other resources. So obviously in the middle of winter, or maybe even in summer, if it's a bit cloudy and everyone's got the air conditioners on, the consoles may not draw in as much power because of whatever reason. So they're still working out the kinks on that one, so don't worry about that anytime soon. But it just sort of shows you where they're thinking, what their goal is, in terms of their platform. Staying in the world of console updates though, PlayStation also dropped an update during the week. So the update has an official number, it's all there, it comes with system, stability improvements like they all do. But the main reason why this update exists is to allow for the PlayStation 5's DualSense Edge controller to connect to the console. So if you're not aware, this is the DualSense Edge. It is very much like the current DualSense controller, except on the back you'll find that it has 2 buttons. I call them buttons because they kind of look like buttons from like a shirt that are on their side, but they're programmable, paddles, if you will. We also have the adjustable triggers. So if you're someone who doesn't need the long press, so maybe you want a very short press, which will let you shoot fast from Call of Duty, that would be for you. On the front, the sticks, the caps are replaceable. You can take them off, put in a concaved one instead of a concaved one, or vice versa. You can have taller sticks and all that sort of stuff. This black plate on the front here, you can see a tiny little line in here. This actually now pops off, and you can actually take these sticks out. So if you throw the controller during a bit of rage and the stick breaks, instead of having to buy a $110 controller, which is what you would have to do currently for the standard PlayStation 5 controller, you can actually just buy a stick for $30, pop this off, take the module out, put the new module in, and you're good to go. The other thing too is that these 2 buttons down the bottom are also programmable buttons, so you get a lot more flexibility in how you use the controller with back buttons and all that sort of stuff. The replaceable stick modules are probably the biggest selling point. If you are someone who either does put their controller through a lot of use, or you're constantly buying new controllers because you suffer from drift quite a fair bit, which these are still physical controller modules, so they're not the Hall effect sensor ones, so that will still be a thing. The other thing too is that on the top there are little notches. You can't see it on the picture here, but there are little notches where the cable plugs in for charging. You get a little, a cap for your USB cable to sit in, and then when you put the cap on and you plug it into the controller, you can actually flick it to a locked position, and that lock will then actually stop the cable from pulling out. So if you are trying to focus on gaming and you want to make sure your controller stays charged, that'll be what that's for. The only thing with these controllers is they are $340 here in Australia. So to put in context, the standard DualSense controller is $110. I believe they were on sale just before Christmas for around $90 at some stores, so $90 to $110. But these are $340. So for the price of one of these controllers, you can buy 3 regular PlayStation controllers. Right? This is not an exclusive thing to Sony. The Xbox Elite controller is $250, whereas the standard, depending on the color, is either $100 or $110. So it's not an exclusive Sony thing that the price is much higher. The difference obviously is you can buy 2 Xbox regular controllers for the price of their Pro, whereas on PlayStation you can buy 3 for the price of their Pro. It's very interesting that they're doing it this way, that they're going not out of their way to say this is what we have, but they're doing it to say, hey, we've got this option. Obviously, one of the big things is the battery life on this new controller is going to be a lot worse than the current PlayStation DualSense controller, which in and of itself isn't great. The current DualSense controller will get anywhere from 6 to 8 hours depending on what you're doing. If you're playing sporadically, you may get 10 or 12 hours. But if you're playing one big session, you may have to charge the controller partway through. So this controller has even worse battery life. What I find hilarious still is that the Nintendo Pro controller rocks 50-60 hours no problem. It just sort of makes me chuckle how PlayStation seem to be struggling with battery life in their controllers. So a few Australian outlets were invited to go check it out at PlayStation's headquarters to sample it and see, hey, this is what we have. I was not one of them, but there are some hands-on reports now floating around the internet, and I did link it in the article, which will be in the show notes on YouTube if you do want to go check that out, from Kotaku. Moving on to something that you can play, and that is that Company of Heroes 3 has launched its multiplayer tech test. So normally we would see, like Call of Duty have them, they have their beta weekends where they test everything out. And, they do a whole thing with different platforms and access windows and all sorts of stuff. The multiplayer tech test is literally just exactly that. It is a technical test to ensure that the servers and game modes and all that are going to stand up to repeated use once Company of Heroes 3 does launch in February. Access to this does not require you to register, does not require you to submit a form to pre-order the game, nothing like that. You just go to Steam, and I'll throw the story link here in the chat so you can see it, go into it. But you just go to Steam, and on the Steam page, there's a button that just says register. You click that, you get registered, you can download the technical test build, and off you go. The only thing with this is that it is only available until 5 a.m. on Tuesday, the 17th of January. So basically, you get this weekend to enjoy some Company of Heroes 3. Now, I got to play Company of Heroes 3 last year. I got to play it for about a week and a half. It was fantastic. I loved every moment of it. Let me find the link for that one so I can share it. So what it was, the first few hours of the campaign and some multiplayer. Now, I didn't get into the multiplayer all that because the hands-on times were unfortunately in the middle of the night, which is what they always are for us here in Australia. But the few sessions that I did try, they were pretty short, but they were fun. So if you're interested in giving Company of Heroes 3 a bit of a go, you can do that this weekend. Now, obviously, it's not the full multiplayer suite, so don't go in expecting to do that. And none of the progress that you make in the game will carry over to the retail release. With all that sort of fun news or interesting news, we have to turn our attention now to some bad news. Excuse me, bad news is probably not the best word. It's sad news, or resigned acceptance is probably a better term for it. And that is that Skull and Bones has been delayed again. So Skull and Bones was put into production back in 2014 once Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag released. The basic goal was to take the technology and all the sort of gameplay systems from the ship combat in that game and build it out to a full multiplayer experience. That was what the production was. In 2017, we got the full reveal at E3. Then post that, we sort of had nothing. Now, I do go into a bit of detail. But basically, we cycled through a whole lot of, we would get a release window, then the release window would change, then it would, we'd get another one. So I'll scroll down to it because I think it's interesting. So basically, when it was debuted in 2017, we got told it would be a late 2018 title. But then in 2018, it got pushed back to 2019. In 2019, we got told it was before 2019 ended, we got told it was going to be 2020. But then in late 2019, we got told it would release sometime in the fiscal year for Ubisoft, which is April 1st to March 31st. So it would release sometime between April 1st, 2021 and March 31st, 2022. Cool. Okay, we have another year. We'll wait and see. In May of 2021, so, about 6 weeks after it could have potentially released, it was delayed again another full fiscal year. So it was coming out sometime between April 1st, 2022 and March 31st, 2023. In July of 2022, we actually got a date, right? So all these times we've had information, it's all been the same. It's been a window. Hey, it's going to come out in Q3. It's going to come out in this year, right? It's going to come out in the second half of the year. All that stuff has been windows. We actually got a date, and that was November 8th, right? That was not meant to rhyme, and I do apologize. But then September of 2022, so some 6 or 7 weeks after the game was dated, they announced they were delaying it until March 9. Okay. Now, I got to play the game last year. I think it's interesting. I didn't get to play a whole lot of it, though. So I didn't get to experience some of the endgame content, or once you were, significantly leveled. None of that was available to me. But what I did play was interesting. Now, in the wake of Ubisoft either putting up numbers that were astronomically unreachable or people just not caring. They've revised a whole bunch of stuff, lowered their estimates on what they're going to be selling for the quarter, for the year, all that sort of stuff, because they didn't sell as many copies of Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope as they expected, which I think they sort of, with how the first one had such a long tail, they were thinking people would jump in on this one. But most people know that Ubisoft games tend to get discounted pretty quickly, so I think they were just waiting. But Just Dance 2023 didn't sell well. But that game also only got announced in September, released in November. They didn't push it. It wasn't at PAX, for example, here in Australia, because Ubisoft weren't there. And the worst thing is, it was no disc. So there was no cartridge for Switch, no disc for the other platforms. And it was also only PS5, Xbox Series X and S, and Switch. There was no PS4 or Xbox One version of the game. So that game had a whole bunch of reasons as to why it probably wasn't selling as well as it used to. But because of both those, they've changed things. So they've also cancelled 3 games that we haven't got any information on, right? So these games were in some stage of development. They've officially cancelled them. So things like the Splinter Cell remake are still technically okay because we know about that game. Whereas these were, maybe they're going to get announced next week. We don't know, but they've been cancelled. Obviously, they probably are not that far into development, because if you've spent 2-3 years developing a game and it's due to release this year, you wouldn't sort of wipe all that money for no reason. With all that, though, they announced that, Skull and Bones is being delayed again. Now, what they've said is that it will be released in early 2023-24. So what that means is that the new release window is sometime between April 1st, 2023 and March 31st, 2024. Okay, so when this game releases, sometime in that fiscal year, it will have been a staggering 7 years between when it was officially announced, or 6 to 7 years between when it was officially announced and when it was released. Now, what is sort of interesting with this is they've said early in that fiscal year, right? So early could mean April, May, or June, right? They could mean early 2024, and they're just using fancy wording to try and get around saying, hey, it's not coming out for another year. The official statement that Ubisoft put in their investor relations release said players will be able to discover the beauty of Skull and Bones in an upcoming beta phase, which was also sort of news. The additional time has already paid off from the November delay and brought impressive improvements to its quality, which has been confirmed by recent playtests. We believe players will be positively surprised by its evolution. We've decided to postpone its release in order to have more time to showcase a much more polished and balanced experience to build awareness of Skull and Bones. So basically, they're saying, hey, we need more time to polish the game. And I put it down there. You can't polish a turd. Right, the game looked interesting in 2017. The late 2018 date was cool. That meant we could have had multiplayer pirate adventures in 2018. The problem was Rainbow Six Siege was on the way. Rainbow Six Siege actually launched, back then. But it launched and it bombed. People did not like that game when it launched, right? Because it wasn't what people wanted. That was 2015 is when it failed, when it launched and failed out of the gate. So what they did is they turned around and said, cool, we're going to make sure our games launch in the best state they can, right? So since this game was announced, we had Far Cry 6 get delayed. We had Prince of Persia Sands of Time remake, be delayed and then basically delayed indefinitely. Beyond Good and Evil 2's been delayed. So there's a whole bunch of these titles. The Rainbow Six Extraction was delayed. Riders Republic was delayed, so they keep delaying games to make them better at launch. This game has seen so many delays at this point that you can't honestly assume that it's going to be a smash hit title, because people are either A, have forgotten about it, or B, convinced that when it does release, the old adage of you can't polish a turd and call it something else because it's still going to be a turd underneath, it's just going to flop. Now, the reason why I'm sort of being critical on this is because games that have had exceptionally long development cycles have never done well. Right. You could argue Pikmin 4 is going to be a bit of a flop from Nintendo, because back in 2015, Miyamoto said Pikmin 4 is basically done, right? But there was never an announcement of that game. The announcement officially came last year. So, whether or not they rebooted everything, who knows? Metroid Prime 4 has now technically been in development for 6 years, Still nothing on that. All right, Duke Nukem Forever took forever. A 14-year development cycle, and when it finally released, it was utterly crap. So games that tend to get stuck in development always seem to fail, and they don't release as bad games. They just don't match up to the level of expectation that many folks have put on them. And that's sort of the issue here, is that when Skull and Bones was first announced, people said, hey, this looks like the fighting from Assassin's Creed, but with multiplayer, we're in. Then it got delayed, and then they stopped talking about it. And it was only really in investor relations meetings, where they say, hey, to our shareholders, we made X number of dollars this year. It was only in those sort of meetings where they kept talking about it. So every time they bring it up, it's always the same thing. They talk about it, and then they go, cool. This is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it. I honestly think it's going to go badly for Ubisoft. I don't want it to. I want to be wrong here, and I want it to come out incredibly strong and get a good thing. But that's not the way that games have been. History has proven that point, and I don't think it's going to change with this one. All right, enough of the negativity. Let's move on to a bit of good news. Not good news, but good things. So last week we posted up a series of previews for 2023, looking at individual publishers. So last week we got out the PlayStation one, the Xbox One, Nintendo as the first three, and that was specifically so we could look at the three console makers, what they were doing. Once we had those three out, we moved on alphabetically into the big publishers. So we did Activision Blizzard, Bethesda, because they technically operate on their own. They're not part of Xbox, and I wish people would stop saying they are. And then Capcom. So we did 6 last week because we started on the Sunday, being the first day of the new year. This week, we went through Electronic Arts, Embracer, Sega, Square Enix, and Take-Two today. So let's just have a quick look through Electronic Arts. So obviously there are a few games we know are coming that have dates, and there's a few games we expect to come, like the yearly Madden. So let's have a quick look through. So the way these features are written up is we go through by company, and then if they have multiple studios in multiple locations that work on sort of different things, we have to cover them that way. So for BioWare, they used to have 3, but they've currently got 2 locations. BioWare Edmonton is the original BioWare location. For a while they had a Montreal office, or Quebec, one of the two. It didn't do so well, so they sort of closed it down, brought the folks back into the main office. Honestly, Dragon Age should be the title that comes out this year, because that game's been in development for forever. We know it's called Dragon Age Dreadwolf, so not Dead Wolf, Dread, D-R-E-E-A-D, right? Dread. We got an update last year from the studio manager for BioWare that the game is now in its alpha state. And the time between an alpha state and a beta state can be as long as a piece of string is, right? There's no set time. It's not like, hey, 6 weeks after you hit alpha, we hit beta, right? There's none of that. Some people may like to think it's that way, but that's not the case. So what we're sort of talking here is, with an alpha state, it means that the game is playable, right? You can start a new game, play through all the story content, all the levels, and get to the end and see the credits. Right, but what it means is that, maybe animations for an enemy type are not there. Maybe textures for a weapon or a wall don't load in, right? So everything is playable, but it's not necessarily in, the way you would want players to see it. So if the time between the alpha state and the beta state is about 6 months, which is the usual sort of time frame, 6 to 9 months, right, that would bring us up to April for a beta. Now, if everything is going smoothly, if there's no issues with the development from that point, or to that point, I should say, it is technically possible we would see a release this year. If that's the case, we may see something in June, depending on if EA are hosting an EA Play event, which they didn't do for the last couple of years because nobody was doing things. But, we might see something there. The other game they're working on is Mass Effect 5. We know this. They've confirmed its development. We got a new piece of concept art last year during their N7 celebrations. But that game is still a while off. The other studio that BioWare have is BioWare Austin. And BioWare Austin are consistently developing the Old Republic MMO. So this is now the 11th year this game's been running, so it's been going for a while. The big thing for them this year is they're moving the game from a 32-bit entry to a 64-bit entry. So when the game first launched, it was built for 32-bit CPUs, so all the tools they were using to make the content and all the stuff the games could actually render out were all limited by that CPU throttle. They're removing that. It's now going to a 64-bit CPU, which is the standard, and that means that the worlds will look more detailed, things should load faster, they can do more with the tools to build better places to go and explore, better systems. So all that's happening. Right. Then we go into Codemasters. Now Codemasters, purely racing, nothing special about them. The Southam studio, they did Grid Legends last year. Apart from some DLC or updates this year, we're not going to see anything from them. Birmingham, they do the F1 games every year. We will see, F1 23. Generally speaking, they tend to release in the first week of July. Last year it was July 1st, but it depends on the day. We may see it, on the 2nd or 3rd of this month of July this year. Who knows? The Cheshire studio actually closed last year and reopened. They got a name change. They're now Criterion Games. So Criterion Games is the one company in 2 locations, but I left them in here just because they do have that history. Codemasters Kuala Lumpur is an asset studio, basically, right? So if the F1 team need to have assets made, they can send it off to Kuala Lumpur and say, hey, we need, these billboards done for this track, right? And the team there will do that, send them back off to the F1, the main team, and they'll get incorporated into the game. So you don't see games from the Kuala Lumpur studio, but they do have their hands in all the games that Codemasters develop. The India studio is a quality assurance studio. They don't make games. That is all they do, is they go over, and make sure the games you're playing are actually playable. So each of the studios has internal Q&A inside the building, but India is sort of the big umbrella for them. They also own Slightly Mad Studios. Slightly Mad Studios had a pretty shit 2022. In April, we got Fast and Furious Crossroads was delisted from all the digital stores, which is not a bad thing because that game is utter trash. But then in August, we got told that both Project Cars and Project Cars 2 are being delisted. One got delisted in September, one got delisted in early October. Those things are just licensing. A company will say, hey, yeah, you can put our car in your game, but you can only do it for 7 years. Or the track's available, but maybe they sold the rights to somebody else, all that sort of stuff. So it's the reason why the Forza games get delisted after a few years of being on market. It's literally just a licensing thing. But Project Cars 3 is the only game still going for them because EA killed the Project Cars series. So they were developing Project Cars 4. That is no longer happening. This is not they're restarting development. It is, no, they are not making Project Cars anymore. So Project Cars 3 is still alive because that game's only a few years old. With that age, it means they've got a few years left on the license, so it doesn't make any sense for them to pull the game off the market because it's basically easy, free money for them now. But all the staff at Slightly Mad are now moving on to supporting other Codemasters projects. Right, I'm not going to go through all of these in detail because otherwise it'll take forever. But EA Games, so this is their sort of main label. Criterion Games put out Burnout. They put out Need for Speed Unbound last year. Interesting game. I'm not a fan of it. I tried playing it many times over the holiday break, and it just didn't work for me. DICE is working on Battlefield 2042 and fixing that game. They keep doing every 3 months or so. They do a new season, where they're sort of redoing the maps they do 1 or 2 maps a season. So they're sticking with that. Baton Rouge is a QA studio for EA. So that's where sort of all these games get tested. EA Chilingo is a mobile, publisher. So they do a whole bunch of things like Cut the Rope many years ago. Galloway is not a studio. That is where all the EA Play purchases are processed through because there's no tax in Ireland, so they get all the money. Gothenburg is where Need for Speed was being made for a number of years before it went back to Criterion. So they're now supporting Frostbite game engine development. But because EA use Frostbite in basically every game, from Battlefield, Need for Speed, Madden, all that sort of stuff. All those, all the games that they make are made on Frostbite, so this is a dedicated studio to support that. EA Korea is still a studio, but the games they make will not make any sense to anyone here. They're currently working on FIFA Online 4. So they do the work with Nexon Games, and it is a PC and mobile title. And this released back in 2018, so it's been ticking over for a number of years now. Obviously, with EA now losing the FIFA license, it'll either get a rebrand this year to be EA Sports FC, or they'll just relaunch a new version of the game. We don't know yet. But every year they add new players and stadiums and all that sort of stuff. They keep it updated pretty consistently. Full Circle is the team developing Skate, and that is Skate with a period at the end of it. That is how they've decided to write it. It is a free-to-play game. It'll be coming out sometime in 2023. No actual date yet, just that it'll be out this year. They do things they call the boardrooms every couple of months, where they go into very technical information on development stages of the game. So if you want to follow along with that, those are there. Maxis, they're working on Sims 4 content, and they're also pumping resources into Sims 5, which is set to really amp up everything about The Sims. Motive Studios, they're currently working on Dead Space, or they should be done with it at this point. That is out in a couple of weeks, but their next game is an Iron Man game. So they're moving from Dead Space into Iron Man. So they got a thing with suits at the moment. Pogo Studios are actually a free online game service. So you go to pogo.com and you can play it. They launched Risk Pogo Domination last year. It is a fully free-to-play version of Risk. There's no ads. It's just you can enjoy the game. PopCap Games, they're the people that do the Plants vs. Zombie series and a bunch of other things. Last year, they started soft launching in some regions Plants vs. Zombies 3. It is still very far from being done. All the work they're doing is more to focus on getting mechanics right and all that sort of stuff. The last one was in October. And even back then they said, look, we don't know when this is coming out, but it's a mobile game, so it could be very at last minute. Respawn, we know they're working on Star Wars Jedi Survivor. There's also a new Star Wars FPS from the same team that did Medal of Honor Above and Beyond recently, the VR game. And they're also working with BitReactor to make a strategy Star Wars game. So big sort of year for Star Wars from Respawn. And there's also obviously Apex Legends. They've got an event going right now. They'll probably have 1 or 2 seasons this year with new characters or new legends and a bunch of other things. So it's them. Ripple Effect used to be known as DICE Los Angeles. They're working on Battlefield for the Portal mode. So where you can go in and say, hey, the guns can only shoot rockets, but you only get 3 shots per gun no matter what gun you pick up, right? So you can do that sort of stuff, and you can say it's now on a Battlefield 4 map, and everyone has defibrillators, and that's the only way you can kill people, right? So you can do all that sort of stuff. You can make your own sort of modes and all that sort of stuff in the Battlefield Portal thing. Ridgeline Games is one of the new studios that EA started up at the end of 2021. Now, Marcus Cato, I can't remember his name. They basically said it is a narrative adventure for Battlefield. So I think sort of Battlefield Hardline, Battlefield 4 campaign, Battlefield 3 campaign, Battlefield Bad Company. So it's going to be a very focused narrative-driven adventure in the Battlefield universe. Beyond that, we know nothing about it. But, Marcus, the guy who started this studio up for EA, he's the co-creator of Halo. So he was there for, Halo 1, 2, and 3 and Reach. So he's definitely got the Halo, the shooter experience. So this sort of blends in well with him. The other unnamed studio, the other studio they started still doesn't have a name. This one is done by Michael, I can't think of his name, but he was at Monolith Productions. Yeah. They did, Fear games many years ago, and then the Shadow of Mordor series. The rumor is that they're doing a Black Panther game in the studio. This sort of rumor popped up a couple of weeks before EA and Marvel Games said they're striking a deal to make new content, new games. And then the first game they confirmed was Iron Man for Motive. So it sort of led a bit of credibility to that Black Panther rumor, but there's no confirmation yet. EA Mobile, they make mobile games. The Five Monkeys guys down in Melbourne, Real Racing 3, Need for Speed No Limit, and the Sim series, getting updates constantly. Who knows what else they're doing. Industrial Toys, they're a new studio that started up to make Battlefield Mobile. A bunch in there. EA Sports, they're making, we know EA Sports FC is coming. That's the new version. That is the new name for the FIFA game. Madden 24 will come out of out of Tiburon. So Cologne is the German office for EA. That is where sort of all the games pass through. They don't do active development there. Madrid is, QA essentially. EA Romania does some sort of they do the challenges and all that for the soccer game. But the bulk of the development is done in Vancouver. EA Tiburon do the Madden series. They've done the NBA games in the past. They also did a Superman game many years ago and back on Xbox 360 to tie in with the Superman Returns movie. They're also the developers for the upcoming golf game from EA, which there will be news on that soon. Look, there we go. EA Sports PGA Tour. As I said, Vancouver does it. Metalhead, they're in there as well. So there's a lot in there for EA. So we do have them for Sega. We do have them for Square Enix. And obviously Take-Two went live this morning. So Take-Two, they've got... Take-Two is very interesting, right? They have a studio called 31st Union. It is a studio that is started in California, which was the 31st state in the Union, which is what they called America. When they added state, they said it was, X number of states in the Union. So that's where the name comes from. That studio started up in 2019, and we still don't know what they're working on. Now, Michael Condrey, who co-founded Sledgehammer Games, left Sledgehammer Games to start this new studio. He directed James Bond Everything or Nothing, Dead Space, and the Call of Duty titles that Sledgehammer Games put together, right? Before they even finished, before they even said what the first game they're making is, they opened up another sister studio in Spain. So there's a studio in America and a studio in Spain, which basically gives them like a 24-hour development cycle if they need it. Still no word what they're doing. Cloud Chamber, they've got two offices, one in Novato, California, one in Montreal, Canada, and they're working on the new Bioshock game, but they said that back in 2019, and since then there's been nothing. The other studio that we sort of know nothing on is Hangar 13. So Hangar 13 has their main office in Novato in California, but they also have Hangar 13 in Brno in the Czech Republic and Prague in the Czech Republic. And I'm calling it Brno. It's BRNO. So it's a very weirdly pronounced written word for me. But that studio used to be 2K Czech, and it used to be called Illusion Works, I think it was back in the day. And they were the original developers of Mafia. So, they're now Hangar 13, and they've also got Hangar 13 Brighton. So the four studios are all working on the new Mafia game, but there's also a rumor that there is a new Topspin game coming out from them. So what is interesting is, what were 2K Czech, so Hangar 13 Brno, they are actually the developers of the last Topspin game, so they could be working on that. As for the Mafia game, we know it's a Mafia game, but there is also a rumor that it's a prequel to the first Mafia, and there's also a thing that it is a proper Mafia 4 set after the events of Mafia 3. So, we have to sort of balance all that up. Visual Concept actually have 9 studios around the world, but they just focus on their NBA and WWE games. They've done NHL in the past and a few other things, but, they're just going to stick with what they do. Ghost Story Games, that was going to be the 4th studio that had nothing announced, but they announced at the Game Awards last year, Judas, which is their first title. Ghost Story Games used to be Irrational Games, the makers of Bioshock, so it's interesting how all that's working. Yeah, Tabs, so the rumor is that there's a new Topspin game in development by Hangar 13, and the fact that there's a Hangar 13 studio that made, so the last one was 2011, and that was made by 2K Czech, which is now Hangar 13 Brno. It all sort of connects together, and you can sort of see, okay, maybe there is some truth to the rumor, but until they can't confirm, who knows. The private division arm of Take-Two, they did The Outer Worlds, Ollie Ollie World, things like that. So they bought up Intercept Games, which is doing Kerbal Space Program 2, which is finally set to launch next month into early access. They also own Roll 7, which did Ollie Ollie World last year, and Rollerdrome. But Private Division also just do publishing for games. So we know there's a Middle-earth game coming from them, and it's not coming, via some random small indie studio you've never heard of. Weta Workshop, the folks that made all the stuff for the Lord of the Rings titles, They're the ones making this new Middle-earth connected game. We do not know what type of game it is. We don't know if it's a VR game, if it's a top-down RPG. We don't know if it's a first-person game. Nothing. We know nothing other than the fact that Weta Workshop is making a Middle-earth game and Private Division are publishing it. But last year, we also got word that they've got deals going with Die Gute Fabrik from Germany, Evening Star, Yellow Brick Games, and the Bloober Team. Bloober Team popped up in the news last year because they're remaking Silent Hill 2 for Konami. So there's a lot coming from Private Division. And then you get into the Rockstar games. Rockstar have studios in Dundee, India, Leeds, Lincoln, London, New England, North, which is set in America, San Diego, and Toronto. They're all working on GTA Online content, small Red Dead Online content, but the primary amount of them will be working on Grand Theft Auto 6, which obviously did leak a bit last year, so it's something to sort of pay attention to. Now, I would go through the Embracer group. I could go through in detail and bust down every single thing that's in this list, but there were 122 studios before I deleted a group. So I deleted the Coffee Publishing group. So Coffee Stain North are the folks that did Goat Simulator 3 last year, which actually have a bunch of stuff from that game behind me. So they did that last year, but they tend to just be more of a publisher of other studios' content than a developer. So I didn't really want to dive into them. But let me bring this up. So Embracer they own a lot, right? So the Amplifier Game Invest group is exactly what it sounds like. They invest in studios to help them out, right? So they're kind of like, the Nintendo Indies or the PlayStation Indies scene, where they come up and they partner with indie developers to help them out, whereas these guys do a little bit more than just help them out. So they've got a whole bunch of things going on there. So Framebreak, they're doing Lightyear Frontier. It goes through all of them, right? And I've even put in the dates when these studios were acquired as part of it. This one is not Misc Games because I don't know what it's called. It's actually called Misc Games. And they have a series called Fishing North Atlantic and Fishing Barents Sea. They're literally, if you've seen like the Wild Catch or whatever it's called, the fishing thing, the fishing show where they go out on the trawlers into the rough seas and fish, that's what these games are. They've been doing those games for a number of years. They keep adding content all the time. Maybe we'll see something from them again soon. There's a whole bunch in there. The Tarsier Studios, so the folks behind Little Nightmares 1 and 2 and The Stretches, they're owned by the Amplifier Invest branch of the Embracer Group. So we haven't seen anything from them since Little Nightmares 2 launched. Hopefully that changes soon. One of the new acquisitions last year was CDE Entertainment. Technically not, it's Crystal Dynamics and Eidos, but they created a new entity and put these groups under there. So we know that Crystal Dynamics is working on the Perfect Dark reboot with Microsoft and the Initiative Studio. We don't know the extent of how much they're working on that. It could be a lot, could be a little. Last year, they celebrated 25 years of the studio, 30 years of the studio, and 25 years of, and 35 years of Lara Croft. But they put out this massive 2-hour documentary with no clip that talks about the history of the studio. So the Crystal Dynamics have a few locations. Their main one is primarily they're in California, so they're working with the Initiative. Crystal Northwest, they're the folks that are still doing the content for Marvel's Avengers, which is still a Square Enix published title. And then Crystal Southwest started up in sort of mid-2021. We know that they're supporting the development of other games, we just don't know what it is. The other thing that I didn't put in here because there's just no news for it, but last year, Crystal Dynamics, which is owned by Embracer, which has PlayOn and THQ and Deep Silver, announced a new Tomb Raider game is coming. It's in development, and it's being published by Amazon. And that's it. That's the extent of what we know about this game. We don't know, platforms. We don't know anything. We know it is a single-player Tomb Raider game developed by Crystal Dynamics and published by Amazon. So yeah, there you go. So that's in there for Crystal Dynamics. Eidos Montreal is the other half of City Entertainment. They have 2 studios. Eidos Montreal, funnily enough, the last game they shipped was Guardians of the Galaxy, which, it didn't hit the ground running out of the gate. But, once the reviews started coming in, the price dropped a little bit. It drew people's attention. I think it was an absolutely fantastic game. It's now sold nearly, 8.5 million copies, so it's doing really well. They also have an office in Sherbrooke, which is in Quebec. They started up that last year. Who knows what they're working on? Gearbox Entertainment is where Gearbox Software is, Gearbox Publishing, Perfect World, and now Volition. They moved Volition in after Saints Row. The reboot flopped. You make that joke, Tabs, but it could be that she could, maybe Croft Manor has been, taken from her because of whatever reason. She's got to pick up extra shifts, make money somehow. She now drives and does deliveries for Amazon. Gearbox Software had a bit of an interesting year in 2022. They dropped Tiny Tina's Wonderlands and 4 expansions for that game, but they also did New Tales from the Borderlands. So New Tales from the Borderlands, I've put here under Gearbox Software, but it was actually the Quebec studio that did the development on that. So while Gearbox Software in Texas led development on Tiny Tina's Wonderlands and the DLC, Gearbox Studios Quebec did New Tales from the Borderlands. They also have a Montreal office, but that's only been around for a year and change now. We know once it's up and running, it probably is up and running at capacity now. They're going to be doing something in the Borderlands universe. That was confirmed, but we don't know anything about it. It could be a racing game, it could be a card game, it could be a new shooter, it could be a strategy game. We honestly don't know. Last year, there was another Eidos studio that was sold by Square Enix to the Embracer Group, and that was Eidos Shanghai. That is now Gearbox Studio, so they same staff, same leaders, same everything. They just rebranded it to be Gearbox Shanghai, and it now reports into the Gearbox Entertainment Group. So that's why that's there. Gearbox Publishing San Francisco, they do a lot of things. So they used to be, I can't think of what they used to be called now. Oh, Perfect Entertainment. I wrote it there. So they used to be Perfect Entertainment. They're now Gearbox Publishing San Francisco. So they oversee the Star Trek Online MMO and Neverwinter Nights MMOs. They also are publishing Hyperlight Breaker, which is the sequel to Hyperlight Drifter. Have a Night's Death, which is launching in March in full on PC and coming to Switch the same day. And now Remnant 2, which was announced last year by Gunfire Games. Those are being published by this group. Gearbox Publishing is a different arm. So Gearbox Publishing is in Texas. Gearbox Publishing San Francisco is in San Francisco. So Gearbox Publishing, they are publishing Homeworld 3, which is coming out. They oversaw the publishing of Tribes of Midgard and all the seasons that they've done. They also did Godfall, which was a god-awful launch title for PlayStation 5. So there's a few things they're doing, and they're also doing Blank, which is coming out in February. Perfect World Entertainment oversees... they were rebranded to be Gearbox Publishing. Sorry about that one. Cryptic Studios is the developer for Star Trek and Neverwinter Online. They both got big updates in 2022. There's a big sort of expansion with, the character Wesley Crusher from Star Trek New Generations, I think he is, in the game. And, Will Wheaton came in and all that. So they've done a few things like that, bringing the actors from the various shows in when they can. And then obviously Volition is now part of Gearbox. They used to be under the Deep Silver banner. Deep Silver are more, European based, whereas this studio is in the US and Gearbox is in the US, so it sort of made sense to move them there. So obviously Saints Row launched and people had issues with it. They did a big update in end of October, early November, that fixed a number of issues, but people still are not quite happy with it. The game sold okay. It met the expectations of Embracer, but didn't, set the charts on fire like they hoped it would. So, they might have some DLC coming for it. Obviously, they're going to keep patching it. The extent to which they keep trying with this game, who knows? Lost Boys Interactive, they got bought up by Gearbox end of 2021, early 2022. Who knows what they're working on? It's early days. Now we get into the PlayOn group. So PlayOn used to be Koch Media. So last year they were Koch Media. Halfway through the year they rebranded for whatever reason. Inside of PlayOn, they have the Deep Silver publishing group, and inside of that we have Dambuster Studios. Dambuster Studios, they've shipped one title so far, and that was Homefront: The Revolution, which was an interesting first-person shooter, survival-ish type game. That was fun. Didn't really do so well. There was some issues with it. They're currently working on Dead Island 2, which saw a delay announced late last year from its planned February release to the end of April, giving it another 12 weeks, which is kind of funny because Dead Island 2 was announced 6 or 7 years ago and it just kept getting delayed or ignored. So that's on its way. Fish Labs, they shipped earlier into the PS5, Xbox Series X lifecycle Chorus, which was a space shooter. That shipped in 2021. They did some updates throughout 2022 for it. If they're working on something new, we don't know. The one that is sort of really exciting is Free Radical Design. So 2021, Deep Silver announced that Free Radical was being reformed, and then the game they're working on is Time Splitters. So what is very interesting about this is that Homefront developer Dambusters was Free Radical Design. So Free Radical obviously started up after GoldenEye Perfect Dark from the Nintendo 64. A bunch of the developers left, started up Free Radical Design. They made Time Splitters 1, 2, 3, and Second Sight. Then they got bought up by Crytek, then they made Haze for Ubisoft. That game absolutely bombed. It did not do well at all. Then they got bought up by Crytek, the people who make Crysis. They did some stuff for them, helping port the games and all that sort of stuff. And then they started working on Homefront: The Revolution, but they got renamed to be Dambusters. There's a whole saga with them. So yeah, Free Radical Design, the name was free again, so they started it up. We don't know what the status of the game is. We know they're actively working on it and they're hiring, but that's all we know. The last game inside the Deep Silver banner is Digiart. They did Road 96 a couple of years ago, hit most platforms. It was a Switch game first, came to the rest. If they're working on something new, it could be a while. They're a very small studio. Flying Wild Hog got bought up in 2021 by Embracer. So they've got a few studios. So Flying Wild Hog, the main studio. Last year, the company oversaw the shipping of Shadow Warrior 3 for Devolver Digital, Trek to Yomi for Devolver Digital, and then Evil West at the end of the year for Focus Entertainment. We know there's DLC coming for Evil West. That's really all we have. Flying Wild Hog Krakow is working on Space Punks. Space Punks is a top-down action game. It's in what they call an open beta state at the moment, which means they can pump out updates pretty quickly if they need to. That game is available via Epic. It's not fully released yet, so it's still in a beta state, but it's there. The Rezel studio is they worked on Trek to Yomi. We know that they're doing something new, but we don't know what it is yet. Milestone is there as part of PlayOn. They do MotoGP, Monster Energy Supercross, SBK, and they do them yearly. They're going to make more motorbike games this year. Interestingly, Prime Matter is a publisher, which is under PlayOn, which is under Embracer. And Prime Matter published... what was it? They published something last year. The Last Urukai, that was what it was. Which is it was a 1 or 2 player, medieval-ish fantasy space game. And they also did Dolmen, which was a game made out of Argentina. System Shock, we know that's coming in March. That's the window it got the other day. They're also doing publishing duties for Payday 3. We got new information on that earlier this month. And then they're also doing publishing duties for the new Painkiller game, which they're overseeing development of, and Kingdom Come Deliverance for Switch, which was announced back in 2021. And since the announcement, there's been nothing. So we could see some more from them this year. Ravenscourt, they do the Let's Sing series. They pumped out Let's Sing 2023 last year and Let's Sing ABBA. We'll probably see more Let's Sing this year. Warhorse Studios has been around for a decade now, and they've made one game and they're still riding on the coattails of it, and that is Kingdom Come Deliverance. Development of the Switch version is being done by Saber Interactive, who are down in the list here, so we'll get to them in a bit. But they're still just doing stuff for Kingdom Come Deliverance. Don't know how they're supporting this one game for so long when it's not really a popular game, but that's what they're doing. Moving down the list, Vertigo Games. So they do a lot more VR side of things. The Vertigo Arcade is, if you've been to, they have one in Melbourne and Brisbane. I don't know if they do it anywhere else yet, but zero latency. So they do basically like VR rooms, right? They make games for like large spaces. So that's what that group does. The publishing, they just publish games. That's them. Vertigo Studios, they're the folks that do After the Fall and Arizona Sunshine for VR, and just After the Fall has a regular mode as well. And Forcefield, they do. They used to do games under that banner, but they got renamed to be Vertigo Studios, like UK essentially. Saber Interactive, oh boy, Saber Interactive is a massive group as well. You can't see it here, but this line that the mouse is moving on, this is the halfway point of the article. Right, so we're only halfway through this group. So Saber Interactive, 34 big things, shipped Redout 2 last year and a bunch of updates, so it's too early to see what they're doing. 3D Realms, the folks that made Duke Nukem back in the days, they shipped Graven last year in November. They're also helping make Phantom Fury, Wrath of Aeon, Sin Reloaded, Combustion, Tempest Rising, and a bunch more. 4A Games, they're the Metro folks. So they're based in Kyiv in the Ukraine. So when the country was invaded, some of the developers obviously left the country for fear of their lives. The Embracer Group said to the developers, if anyone wants to relocate to another country to continue working, they would fully support them in any way they could. We know the studio is hiring for new staff, from a bunch of positions, but with the country still technically, being invaded by Russia, anything they're working on should be a secondary thing compared to their safety. So that's them. Inside the Saber Interactive group is also Aspire, and Aspire has two groups now, two things. There's Aspire Media, so they're the folks that have been porting, all the Star Wars game to Switch and PS4 and that. They're also the group that was supposed to be making the Knights of the Old Republic remake. The apparent quality of that didn't meet the Lucasfilm Games requirements or the Sony Games requirements. So development of that was taken from them and given to Saber Interactive. We'll get to that in a moment. Because that was taken from them last year, their plans have obviously shifted. We don't know what they're doing in 2023. If they want to keep the Switch ports coming with Star Wars, there's still another Force Unleashed game that could make its way over, but we'll wait and see on that. Last year, they also bought up Beamdog. Beamdog got a lot of notice over the last few years for remastering and releasing, Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights, and a bunch of old classic BioWare games for modern platforms. In last year, they dropped their own title called Myth Force. Who knows what that's going to do? It's still technically in early access, so it'll be a full development for that. Bytex is we're back out of Aspire now. We're back in Saber. Bytex worked on the Berserk series many years ago, but they're now just transitioned to being a QA studio for other companies. Demurge Studios, they've done a lot over the years, but they've currently got 3 projects in the works. So they shipped at the very tail end of 2021 Rocket League Sideswipe, so the mobile version of Rocket League. That's these guys. We know they've got a new game being developed in conjunction with Riot, a new game being developed that's apparently entirely in-house. Nobody else is working on it with them. It's just them. And the third game is with Bad Robot Games, which is the J.J. Abrams production company. That production, Bad Robot Games, is overseeing the Silent Hill interactive FMV game, whatever that is supposed to be, but this is something else. Digic Pictures is a studio house, production studio house. So they make movies more than anything. So they do like the intro cinematics and all that sort of stuff. Fractured Byte did Brother, A Tale of Two Sons many years ago, but the most recent stuff is bringing Borderlands to Switch. Tony Hawk. They're doing a bunch of hiring at the moment for a new game. There are rumors that the South Park game is being done by them and published by THQ, which is another Embracer Group studio. But we don't know yet because it's one of those weird things where they may have it, but we don't know. There's no confirmation on who has it, just that there is a new South Park game coming. Madhead Games is working on Scars Above, which is due to release this year. Prime Matter are publishing that one. New World Interactive, they've done the Insurgency series, so Insurgency and Insurgency Sandstorm. That game is 4 years old now, Sandstorm. It is a very realistic first-person shooter. It's not the Call of Duty style shooter where the guns look cool and they sound authentic. It's one of those ones where if you take 1 or 2 shots too many, you die. They've been stuffing up for something new. We don't know what it is yet. Nimble Giant, what's interesting is, they had, a game Quantum League, which was you would run out to try and shoot an enemy, and then when the round sort of restarted, you would run out a different way, but your character from the first round would still go and do the actions that you just did. So that was cool. They actually expanded last year. They opened up, they had their main studio in Argentina, and Sweden have had one for a while, but last year they opened up offices in Peru, Chile, Uruguay, and Spain. So what was 2 studios at the start of 2022 is now 6. The Saber Interactive group has Saber Interactive and a bunch of studios. So Saber Interactive did, they're known for SnowRunner, that sort of series. Last year they finally shipped Quake Champions after a 5-year development and a bunch of years in early access. We know Gloomhaven is being done by this group, and obviously the Switch port of Kingdom Come Deliverance is being done by them as well. They've got their hands on so many things. We have no idea who's doing what really, or what they're working on, so we'll wait and see. Saber Interactive Belarus, they were the ones that brought Phoenix Point to consoles in 2021. No idea what they've been doing since then. Saber Interactive Porto, which is, a studio in Spain, they shipped Dakar Desert Rally last year, and they're working on content for it still. That's all they're doing. Saber Interactive Russia, they're the folks that did, WWE 2K Battlegrounds and NBA Playgrounds many years ago. They were also the ones that were working on the Witcher 3 next-gen versions for CD Projekt Red until that got pulled from them and CD Projekt Red took over development. The studio is also apparently developing Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2. They're working on it, but we don't know if they're the lead studio or a sister studio. And then we have Saber Interactive Spain. They are the ones that did Evil Dead the game last year. It's still apparently coming to Switch in 2023, but they've been doing a bunch of content for it throughout 2022. And then Saber Interactive Sweden is more known as a port studio. So they did Crisis Remastered, Ghostbusters the video game remastered, and a bunch of other things. But we know they're hiring for something else as well. Back out of Saber, Shiver Entertainment. They're the people that ported Mortal Kombat to Switch, Mortal Kombat 11. They've also done some Scribblenauts games. Who knows what they're working on next. Slipgate Ironworks, they did the bulk of the development with Graven along with 3D Realms. Smartphone Labs, they make mobile games. Snapshot Games are the folks that made Phoenix Point that another studio ported. The founder of Snapshot Games is actually the creator of XCOM. And we know they're working on something new, so it's likely going to be another tactical game because both XCOM and Phoenix Point are. Tuxedo Labs is a new game that Embracer bought last year, and they released a game a week before the buyout happened, and it was called Teardown. It was basically, you tear down buildings. You can't just knock them down and you've got to tear them down in certain ways and lots of stuff. They also bought up Tripwire Interactive, which are a publisher. The biggest game that they've made themselves was Maneater. The game that they've published, which has gotten a lot of attention, is the Chivalry series. And then Zen Studios last year had Circus Electrique release, which was their first non-pinball game in quite a long time. But 2023 see a bunch of new pinball stuff for all the platforms. If you can believe it, there's still another arm to go. Yes, so Dead Island 2 has been around for a number of years. What is interesting is the Goat Simulator 3 trailer mocked the Dead Island 2 original trailer, which I just think was hilarious. I'm not going to go through THQ Nordic because, again, there's still a quarter of the story to go through. So as I said, there is a heck of a lot in there. One of the big call-outs from THQ Nordic is... what's their name? Gunfire Games. They're doing Remnant 2, which Gearbox is helping publish. Mirage Game Studios, they're doing a game called Space for Sale. That's on the way from them. Pisces Interactive, which last year they said they were working on something new, but we didn't know what it was. We learned during the year that it is Alone in the Dark. It's the remake of that, or the reboot of that, I should say. Purple Lamp Studios has a game coming out at the end of this month, and that's SpongeBob SquarePants The Cosmic Shake. And then Rainbow Studios, which is its own division, they shipped MX vs. ATV Legends last year, and it wasn't well received because it wasn't a very good game. Right. Again, I won't detail that because there's still more in there that I skipped. But not to overlook, they also, as I said, they have Coffee Stain Publishing, which Goat Simulator 3 was part of. They own Dark Horse Media, so Dark Horse Comics is owned by Embracer Group. Last year they bought Limited Run Games, which they've not actually done anything to make Limited Run work better, they just own them. And they bought last year Middle Earth Enterprises. So they own the story rights for all the Lord of the Rings stuff and the Hobbit and all that. They don't own the movies. That is all Warner Brothers and New Line Cinema. But anything that's sort of not those, that's not directly connected to the Warner Brothers adaptations, these guys now own. So yeah, they own a heck of a lot. It is an insane list. It took me like a week and a half to type all that out because it was so much. Right, with all that done, let's talk about the games that are coming out next week. So today we saw the release of One Piece Odyssey, which was a fantastic game. I loved it. Dragon Ball Z Kakarot also came out for next-gen platforms today. But otherwise, it's been, we've been pretty chill up to today. Thanks, Tabs. It is I said we got Take-Two today. I've got Ubisoft and Warner Brothers to go. So they'll be out Monday and Tuesday. In terms of what I've skipped, I haven't done Bandai Namco because Bandai Namco, they tend to outsource everything to other studios for development, apart from Bandai Namco Studios Singapore and the Japan team. But the bulk of everything that they make is done by external studios that they're basically hiring. They do it as contractor work. And just finding out information on Bandai Namco is almost impossible. I haven't done, Devolver Digital. What was the other one that I was looking at? Good Shepherd Entertainment, and a bunch of other small ones, not small, but more indie-focused publishers, because they tend to make sure their games aren't talked about until they're announced and a release date is sort of locked in. It's extremely rare to see a Devolver game be announced and then delayed. They tend not to do that. They may not date them straight away, but they know, they have an idea of when it's going to release, whereas the big publishers may, apart from like the annual sports games, they'll announce a game, but it may not release on time. But yeah, back to the games coming out next week, I said. So we've had today sort of the first big day of the year with One Piece Odyssey. Obviously, they were aiming for a late 2022 release. They sort of missed it by a couple of weeks, but hey, what can you do? This coming week, though, is going to be a massive week. There's basically 2 days. It's Thursday and Friday, but it's a big week. So on the 19th, we will see A Space for the Unbound, which is an independent sort of game being made out of Indonesia. I think it's Indonesia. Or the Philippines, one of those countries. That looks amazing. It was in my monthly list because it does look so cool. But also on the 19th, we'll see the release of Persona 3 Portable and Persona 4 Golden for Switch, PS4, Xbox One, and Xbox Series X and S. And Persona 3 Portable will also come to PC on that day. So they've not been on anything else before. They're finally getting their chance to come to those platforms. On the 20th, so the day after, we will see the Xbox and PlayStation release of Monster Hunter Rise. Obviously, it was a Switch exclusive, and Capcom can't commit to a Switch exclusive at any point. They've never done so. But that's coming out. It is also launching into Game Pass on that day. So it's currently on Steam on PC. It's also going to the Windows Store and will be available in Game Pass. So that's there if you are a Monster Hunter fan. So if you have, say, Monster Hunter World, this is the next evolution of the series, as it's in Game Pass. Also on the 20th, we will see the release of Fire Emblem Engage. We will likely have a review for it, but it'll be a couple of weeks after launch, because that's just the way things are at the moment. But yeah, so as I said, it's a big week, Persona, Fire Emblem, and Monster Hunter. 3 massive brands, all dropping games across 2 days. If Persona had dropped theirs on the 20th as well, I think people would have lost their minds, because what else can you do if you have dropped all those games on there? The following week, we'll finally see Forspoken release, unless it gets delayed at the last minute. I doubt it, but who knows? And there's a bunch of really interesting stuff later in that week as well. So yeah, so there's I said it's a big week next week for games. Only in 2 days, but it's a big week nonetheless. But with all that said, that does bring us to the end of the show. If you did watch live, thank you for watching live. If you have watched the replay on YouTube, do hit that like button. It does help us out quite a lot. These episodes will be published on YouTube on Mondays now instead of Saturdays. Just makes it easier on me having to do the editing afterwards. They go up at midday on a Monday, so midday Australian Eastern Daylight Time. So whatever the time midday in Sydney is, for you, that's when we'll post them live. We'll be back on Tuesday for more of our Splinter series, where we're going through the final mission of Splinter Cell, the original game. And then once we're done with that, we will jump into Splinter Cell Pandora tomorrow. May not be next week, it may be next week. It just depends on how quickly we get through this sort of final mission. With all that being said and done, so we'll be back on Tuesday for Splinter Cell, and we'll be back next week for the Maxi-Geek Show. But until we see you online again next time, happy gaming.